could see how much and how long my anger and my depression and my fear had a hold of me. Then I realized, then what the heck am I if I'm not those? And it's one of my favorite things about becoming a Buddhist was that I say this quite often. It didn't give me anything. It just showed me how to remove things. I'm not looking for a destination because I realize that the destination will keep getting pushed out further and further away. And then you realize the journey actually is the destination. The moment when you practice compassion, you are immediately removing the divide from yourself and somebody else. You're in company of their passion, right? Like the thing that's giving them emotion. And that is just a small practice of the unity of one person to the other, trying to understand more of who they are, where they are, why they are.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast, where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jummie Moses, spiritual seeker and metaphysical investigator, exploring the mysteries of existence. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Cesar Cardona, who is a speaker and educator. With a certification in mindfulness from Rice University and formative experiences, learning from Sri Lankan and Tibetan Buddhist monks, Caesar combines mindfulness and actionable strategies to foster connection, healing, and resilience. Caesar's life and work are dedicated to unifying people through shared experiences, breaking down barriers, and illuminating the threads that connect us all. He's also the co host of the podcast Beauty in the Break. Caesar, thank you so much for stopping by Shifting Dimensions. It's such a pleasure to have you here on the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Something that I found very fascinating about your story when I was like reading up on your work and just your experience in general was the fact that you were an atheist at some point in your life and then you became a Buddhist. So I just want to jump right into that first and foremost and talk about how did you become an atheist and why was that the spiritual path that resonated with you at one point in your life? And how did you make that shift into Buddhism?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that. And good job on the homework for that stuff. I I started off growing up when I grew up in the South. My father's Catholic, my mother was is Christian. They didn't push their practices or their religion on me, but I did get a bunch of it. And of course, living in the South, majority of people, at least where I grew up in the South, were Christians. I also, because of my childhood, because of my upbringing, there was a lot of isolation in my life. And I didn't necessarily feel a part of my family in some capacity because of the physical isolation as well as being mixed. I never felt I was a part of any particular race. I'd go with one side and the race would tell me, they'd give me, Spanish side would give me crap for not speaking Spanish or because of the shape of my nose, for example. And the black side would say, you listen to Jimi Hendrix or Beethoven or who are these people and why do you talk the way you do? And I didn't fit in there either, of course. So there's another level of isolation that I had. There's a lot of, I'm only speaking from a psychological sense here, but my way into removing my belief as a Christian, believing in a God and a Christian God and Jesus, was probably also just a kind of a rebellion against the society as a whole, right? If this is the community of people that are talking to me and I don't feel a part of them, then I got to find my own thing. And it wasn't a belief, it was a rejection of a belief, rejection of spirituality, which is atheism, right? It's theist, Latin A, to remove, right? But something also kept me safe. It's ironic that I forget the phrase, but the gate you build becomes your prison or whatever, you know? I thought that was my way, a way out of it because it's science based and it's materialistic based. It's all of the things, the practical stuff. But I was just hiding behind it for information instead of saying things like, I don't know the answer. It's not enough. If it's not science, then it's not acceptable. Now, that's a very understandable, practical thing for me to do. But of course, it wasn't serving me in the deeper sense. So I went about 9 years of being just this very strict atheist, but it brought out the not the healthiest versions of me. And this is just a me thing. I wouldn't say this about anybody else who is an atheist. I can't speak for their journey, but for my journey, it brought out the darker version of me. Again, it highlighted the isolated versions of me. And I mean, there's a multiple levels that I can talk about it because depending on the perspective of part of my life, I can tell you what I was doing or why I did it. But from the largest perspective, it feels like it was a deep rejection of an upbringing that was didn't really feel that savory to me, didn't
Yeah.
feel that welcoming to me.
I kind of want to push you a little bit if you're comfortable, because I kind of want to get into the meat of it when you say that it brought out the darker version of you. What do you mean by that? What was your mentality towards people, right? Towards the world? Like, how were you operating in the world in a way that you felt was the darker version of you?
Yeah. I heard this explanation once that I really enjoyed that atheism is like the bad boy of in school, it's like the cigarette smoking of beliefs or lack of beliefs. It's, oh, you all are so silly. Get real. We don't believe in I don't believe in that stuff. I got my cigarettes tied up in my sleeve here, in my leather jacket, and we're gonna go cruising if we live in the 50s. And I find that there's a smugness that came with it for me and other people that I knew who were atheists. Again, not saying all, but the darker parts that came about was one, that deep isolation. Especially from where I was coming from, to break it down in a sense of being a Christian before, you have God, the personification of what Christians believe is God. He looks like them, lives like them, acts like them, so on and so forth. And they call it the Father. Now, my father, in my living life, we didn't get along so well. And there was a lot of time of distance. And I felt isolated from him because I didn't necessarily feel like him, right? So I went into the world saying, okay, so no father on this plane, no father in the spiritual sense. So to reject one, it kind of rejected the other. And that's in a symbolic sense, right? That is darkening because, again, you're giving yourself the entire weight of the world and saying that it's all up to me. Whatever happens to me here, and nothing happens afterwards, which kind of alleviates you from not being the most, I can't think of the word, but not being the best version of yourself who wants to participate in the mystery, who just wants to go on what we know already. But life doesn't work on what we know already. Every day, some new phenomena occurs that we couldn't predict, that no science is able to predict, that no data is able to predict. And I'm still a man of science. I love it. And I recognize its place. It doesn't have to be the entire thing. And then to go into a more psychological sense, since I didn't have anything else to surrender, to give myself to release my ego to, I just went into the mindset of what I have is everything that I got. That's it. But I grew up in a traumatic environment and I hadn't done any intellectual work, let alone spiritual work. So the things that were given to me and the traumatic scars or woundings that I had were the things that were leading me. But I didn't care to go seek it elsewhere because I was saying what I have is what I got. And that led me to a darker path of drinking, substances, promiscuity, not being healthy with my own self, being really damaging to my own self in my own personal voice to myself and in my actions and with people as well. Things became very transactional. Again, I stopped looking at the larger picture and just seeing the physical side. So it just got darker and darker in that way.
You know, you talked a few times, you mentioned the psychological piece of what led you down that path, but I was also thinking about the fact that, growing up in a Christian household, but you weren't met with love. And people who a lot of times, not all, I'm not even going to say most people, but there are some people who are Christians who believe in God, who some of them are Bible thumpers, and something that is preached in Christianity a lot of times is love, but not a lot of people know how to practice that. So when you grow up in a household that believes in one thing but doesn't really practice some of the fundamental philosophies of that religion, of course, it could make someone be like, this ish isn't real. You guys are just hypocritical and I'm going to go on the other side. Not saying that's what you did, but I could also see that being someone's experience.
I completely agree in that sense. Both of those parents, what they showed me was what they thought love was in their best possible way. They were both 25 years old. I'm 35. And when I was 25, there was zero chance I could have taken care of a child at all, anywhere near what they did do for me, because there were also good times as well. And they still looked out for me and they still cared. And they even said, I love you to me. Oftentimes, what I saw in action just kind of was different. I'm also not even here to blame them. I'm not that kind of person. My mother and I
Of
get along
course.
wonderfully. My mom is one of my best friends in my whole world because she recognized the changing of times and she changed as well and found better ways to become a better version of herself. And so have I my own way. So not here to blame because blame brings anger and then anger doesn't help you see what you need to do because you're doing too rigid, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Finding the cause really helped me in that way. And that's when I started getting to that space of, well, wait a minute here. These people are saying A. Sometimes I'm seeing B. And then I'm going in the world and kind of spotting that elsewhere. This sort of do as I say, not as I do mentality. I am finding myself being told a million things from a Christian standpoint. But when I go and research and read up, I go, that's not it either. That's not, I don't understand this. And then of course I didn't have the full scoop of compassion. I had more aggression because it's the household I grew up in. So the aggressive sense of me wasn't let me go understand. It was let me throw it away. We're done here. I'm out. I don't believe in anything. I'm out.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And I've said this to a few people it's interesting that I think that atheism is the opposite side of the same coin in regards to people who are super religious or are religious. And the reason I say that, the reason I have that theory is because I believe I grew up Christian. In many ways, I still identify as a Christian, right? However, I do think that sometimes there's an arrogance of these are the parameters of our belief system. You can't go outside of this box. And I think atheists, they will die on the hill of science. And it's like anything outside of this box, you can't step out of. So to me, it's almost, different sides of the same coin that because I feel like and maybe arrogance is not the word, but there's a sense of knowing that, or having this belief that what they believe is what it is, right? Even though atheists are not necessarily believing in a higher power, but their belief system is that there is no higher power, which is a form of a belief system. But anyways, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole there. So how did you get into Buddhism? What was the switch for you that made you start to explore your spiritual side a bit more and eventually end up where you are today?
That is to this day probably the second best choice of my life was walking into a Buddhist temple in that way. Realizing at some point that all of the things I've mentioned during my atheism as a time as an atheist, those versions of myself, those unpracticed, well, those unhealed, those unchecked versions of myself all got together and kind of figured out a way to make things worse for me because my actions, and this is me not trying to push responsibility off because it was me without question making these choices. But of course, I'm being processed through by beliefs. Your beliefs influence your actions, even if it's the rejection of a belief of certain things. And they can say exactly what they want. And I totally recognize where they're coming from in a literal sense, in a grammatical sense of we don't believe in this thing. You people collect stamps. We don't collect stamps. That's not a habit. Not a hobby is not collecting stamps. I totally recognize that. At the same time, you are being dogmatic as a person by saying that if it doesn't fit this way, then it's the wrong way. This monk told me once, if someone ever tells you they found the way, then you run a way. And that works in every scenario. Every single last, this is not a political conversation, but this past election, we had previous Bernie Sanders voters voted for Donald Trump, right? We have two fringe sides. There's two outside sides that were still horseshoeing towards each other. We're constantly going to find the circle was going to remain unbroken because the cycle of life keeps turning over. And that is one of the most beautiful tenets, in my opinion, of Buddhism. So once you start seeing things in cycles, the hand that goes around the clock, you stop trying to be the hand. You just be the dot in the middle. Your dot is to be centered. That's the meditative part of us, excuse me. So knowing that and seeing me become an extreme version of a rejection of a belief, and then it goes out and influences my actions. And then at some point, those actions, which are the cause, had an effect. And that effect came back and bit me a multitude of times of all the things that were going on to me. And then I got a terrible accident, and I was not treating myself well. I was losing money, and I was almost completely just, I almost had to go back to sleeping in my car in Los Angeles. And I live here for 10 years now. This was 7 years in, and I had nothing because of my choices and my actions, because of responsibility that I wasn't taking. So finally, it's a few things. There's an actual moment that things change, right? And then there's a slow, gradual process. The pond, the puddle turns into the lake, and then the lake turns into the stream, and stream into the river, and the river into the waterfall. All of a gradual thing, and is also a drastic dropping off at some point. And I remember sleeping in my car after my accident, after all the stuff that was going on, and I remember thinking, oh, this is how it starts. This is how homeless people become homeless. You always ask the question, how could you get to this stage? For me, it was those small incremental choices that got me got me in more unhealthy scenarios, in more unhealthy environments, more unhealthy mentalities. So I sat there in that car and I realized that. And I remember the next day I was driving around, and I wished I took my seatbelt off and drove around, because I just wished a car would just hit me while I drove around in traffic. Just wanting it so bad. And I went to North Hollywood in LA, and in North Hollywood, in the North Hollywood Arts District, and people can Google this if anybody listening, if you listening are interested in this. It's a big mural of Jimi Hendrix. It's a brick wall, yellow background. It's him with his hands on his hips, and he's staring. Now, I saw that when I first moved here. And then 7 years later, and I love Jimi Hendrix so much, I went back to that. And as an atheist, as a non believer of anything spiritual, of anything whatsoever, I pulled up to that wall. I turned to it, stood outside my car, and I started talking to Jimi Hendrix. Started saying out loud, "You got me here. I'm why am I here if I'm not going to see the end of 2019? Because nothing has changed. Things have only gotten worse. What am I here for? I don't understand why you'd have me come here." Because I was a musician, and I moved to LA to do music. 2 blocks over was a Buddhist center. And I spent more and more time in North Hollywood. And so finally, I walked into that Buddhist center. And against all of the nature of my thoughts of, don't go in there. Why are you going in there? No, you don't go into a religious building. What's wrong with you? The 9 years of me have been, they were like, you know what I mean? And I remember I sat down, and there was a conversation going on, and one person was speaking, and he brought up a celebrity, a public figure. And it was a public figure it's not really liked. And as soon as he brought it up, I remember my thoughts. I expected him to start tearing this person down, because most people don't like this person. And I was waiting for it. I was waiting. I even had like my response ready for it, to laugh at whatever he was going to say, or to agree with whatever, just verbally show him that I am in accord with him, right? And he brings the man's name up, and then he pauses, and he says, "That poor man must be suffering inside." And it hit me, this level of compassion that I'd never experienced. And if I did experience it, perhaps I wasn't paying attention to it, because of, again, your thoughts influence your actions. And I thought to myself, this is something I might need a little bit of in my life. It's a little bit of compassion. So I sat down and I started doing meditations. And over time, you start to find that all the narratives your thoughts tell you, all of the colors of the spectrum of emotions that your body gives you, and every belief you've ever chosen and have chosen to not practice. Every one of them are temporary and they're not who you really are. You put these on like you put on a shirt. Who you really are as a conscious being, having a human experience. In that meditation, those meditations, I was able to start pulling away all of the peeling away, if I may, all of the things that were given to me as a person in my ancestry, my genetics, my family, and then what I took with me and saw in the world and tried to learn, all of them. They just started getting just pulled back, peeled away, one peel after another, until there was a center of calm, of unity within my own self. And these are over courses, times of meditation. It wasn't the very first sitting in. Unfortunately, this is not a movie from 1994, you know. I and once I recognized that, I could see how much and how long my anger and my depression and my fear had a hold of me. Then I realized, then what the heck am I if I'm not those? And it's one of my favorite things about becoming a Buddhist was that I say this quite often. It didn't give me anything. It just showed me how to remove things.
That's so powerful. Again, why I love having conversations like this is because in having you share your story, it's a reminder to people that we're not stuck in a certain thought pattern, belief system, way of viewing the world, and our lives can radically change. And it all starts from this internal awakening where we completely shift our paradigm. But shifting isn't always easy, right? So you talked about releasing layers and layers of your ego, of your programming. Was that painful for you? Because that's a lot of stuff coming up to the surface that you have to kind of clear out. Was it painful for you? What was that experience as you were reaching those new levels of understanding and releasing?
It's super painful and it's very challenging. It's extremely difficult. First off, saying things like, I don't have the answer. Secondly, saying, I don't know. Thirdly, giving up some of what you thought is supposed to be to some mystery that you can't calculate. Saying the words, I am wrong. Let me find out what feels better. Now, let me find out what feels right because everything changes over time. Let me find out what brings most peace and most clarity now. And being able to realize that when I grab that thing, it's not eternal either. It's hard. It's really challenging. I mean, and I'm still doing it here today. And I expect to do it for the rest of my life. I'm not looking for a destination because I realize that the destination will keep getting pushed out further and further away. And then you realize the journey actually is the destination. So it's really challenging in that way because we have this whole society that tells us you need this. You get this, you'll be happy. You have this thing, you'll be happy. Why is joy and happiness on the lowest percentage in America right now? Why are people more and more unhappy in the society? We're looking for external things. So you gotta like peel that stuff away and then you find things and say this is still temporary. It's hard. And when you do, it is the most rewarding thing ever. You know, the word nirvana is Sanskrit. It means to extinguish. It means to put out. And the sense of what nirvana is the ultimate bliss, right? You die, you go to nirvana, so on and so forth. The word itself, the definition of it, means to put things out. It means to remove the burning, to relieve yourself of something. So it's not a destination. It's taking away all of the things that you find, which is an implication that the best bliss that you're looking for is already here. You just got to peel away. And it's so rewarding in that way.
There's something that you said that I want to zero in on because I think it's very important.
Sure.
And you basically kind of highlighted the fact that as you're going through this experience, you started to become more comfortable with saying, I don't know. What's the next best thing that will make me feel better? Not the, you weren't looking to get to some sort of final destination of knowing. And that is such a big thing to say because I think part of the reason why we have belief systems is because we want a sense of security. We want structure as human beings. We need structure. We need something to guide us. We need something to feel like foundational for us. And the more I do this work, the more I have these conversations, the more I do my own spiritual work, the more I'm realizing that there's certain truths that I think are universal, like the truth of love, right? And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole there, but I'm just using that as an example. But overall, like the more you know, the less you know. And sometimes that can feel very overwhelming. And I can see why people want to grasp onto people and things that can define or lay out like belief systems and sort of be dogmatic in a way that gives security, but that's just really not how life is and the spiritual practice is. And that is kind of like a hard pill to swallow sometimes, right? Because how do you not get so overwhelmed? How do you manage to continue to stay in your center? Which I think you alluded to, but if you could share more insight on that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking that. The Vedic text, the Upanishads say they who say they know doesn't know. They who say they don't know knows. That deep mystery that we participate in. If you're driving, you load your car up with as much information as possible. Fill the trunk up, excuse me, the back seat, the front seat, the top of it, so on and so forth. Tell me how long that car's going to last with all that weight on it, right? There's an appropriate amount you need for sure, but if, over time, it's going to turn away. Tires wear out, the gas you'll or the charge for the car needs to be recharged. There's always things that are going to be peeled away. It's baked into our nature. There's never an ultimate thing. We have sequels to movies. Sports seasons show up again. We have sequels in novels, and we wake up every day, and then we do the next day, and the next day, and the next day. It's baked into our existence, the fact that everything changes and that you're not finding a finite thing. Every billionaire, as you can see, is still constantly chasing more and more elitism or power. We nourish ourselves with food, we will be hungry again. So let us always remember that every single iteration is a temporary iteration. The next ocean wave comes, the moon comes again, the sun rises, and so on. So I can bring up as many metaphors as needed here because nothing is permanent. So it's extremely challenging, extremely hard, but you got to also recognize that you do it intuitively. Like you got to you have to just release the gripping of what you want to be permanent. It is one of the most satisfying things ever. Just release the emotion. If I made one last like metaphor in this because it just came to me, I taught this. I did a speaking engagement for this middle school, and the conversation was about interdependence. So I brought this red thread, and I had all the kids stand in a circle on the outside of the class, and I passed the thread down. And then there was about 25 kids there, and I had three of them from different spots of the circle raise their arms all the way up. And you could feel the tension of the kids next to them because they're trying to keep the thread down, right? So these kids had their hands way above, and the kids next to them were trying to hold it together, which caused more tension to the kid next to them and next to them until it diminished. And at some point, nobody felt anything. And then I had more and more pick up their arms. And then I had everyone hold their arms up. When they did that, I said, all right, everyone drop your arms. They all dropped it together. I said, oh, gosh. Oh, thank you. They enjoyed raising their hands until it was too much. And then they had to go and drop their arms. And then I had them raise their arms again, and they were excited about that. It's just the changing of the thing is where the relief comes in, you know? So, yeah, I feel like that story grabbed it more than anything else.
Ultimately, what I'm taking from what you're saying and what I've come to realize is just you have to be in the flow, even when it comes to learning certain life lessons. once you think you've learned something, there's another layer that comes with it, and you have to be flexible. I think being flexible and being in flow with life and the ebbs and flows and the cycles that come around, I think is what will help you kind of move through life in a way that you're not necessarily restricting yourself to a certain belief system. You're not in shambles when something that you believed to be true or you don't want to leaves you. You can welcome the things that come to you and you can release the things that are ready to be
Mhm.
left from you, if that makes any sense. So,
It does.
yeah. Okay. So now I want to talk about your work and your passion in fostering compassion. Why is
Mm.
compassion such a big topic for you to speak about?
Fostering compassion is a very big thing for me because I grew up without compassion. I say this as a joke, but I also think it's true. I think I was given like an extra scoop of intellect and no scoops of compassion, which is challenging. And yeah, I grew up in a family where people were aggressive at each other. So the less, the more unaffected you could be by somebody, the better you kind of got through the day. And somewhere in there, I just learned that like I can't feel anything if you're upset about something because I'm not here for it. The moment I got to the Tibetan Buddhist temple and I saw that they were leaned far into compassion, I realized this is where I need to be. I had spent time with the Nichiren Buddhist and the Zen Buddhist and the Chan Buddhist and the Sri Lankan, and I learned a lot from every single one of them. And then I got to Tibetan, and I realized there's something deeper going on here, in a sense of what's most effective in this current day and age. You know, maybe at some point another lineage would be more helpful, but because they lean into compassion, and because I needed it, I recognize how effective, how much I should be practicing it. The moment when you the moment when you practice compassion, you are immediately removing the divide from yourself with somebody else. You're in company of their passion, right? Like the thing that's giving them emotion. And that is just a small practice of the unity of one person to the other, trying to understand more of who they are, where they are, why they are. There's so many circumstances in this day and age that we can spend our time finding out or pointing a finger as to why somebody did something without knowing the full circumstances. How often do you know why somebody did something in their full circumstances?
Not that much.
Not that much. Unless you're taped at their hip, how can you? And then what's more, you're taped at their hip, you don't know exactly what they're thinking. So much of our time of saying why somebody else did something is because you are already designated some sort of thought about them, some predisposed idea of them. And then when you go and talk about your situations of what actions you took, you give a bunch of the situations for it. Clearly because you were there. So the moment you start trying to understand the other person for what's going on, whatever it is the moment that you become more in accord with humanity, more in accord with the human nature of another conscious being living here. I'm a non-dualist in belief and practice. So for me, there are ultimately no two things. So for me to see you, for example, for me to see any person in the world, for me to even see physical inanimate objects, I'm just seeing another iteration of consciousness. And the way into that is compassion.
I really like how you put that, right? Because as you were talking about it, you said something about compassion as being in company with someone else's passion. And it also made me think about the fact that when you're compassionate towards someone, you hold space for where they are in the moment. And you said there's a quote that I heard you say on a podcast: to understand doesn't mean that you agree with it. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times people will say, oh, well, if you're being compassionate or empathetic towards someone, like you are, people see that as dismissing their bad actions or dismissing away, you know, things that are wrong. But I really love that you said that quote. And I think when you were talking about it, you were tying it back to your philosophy of compassion. So can you kind of expand on that quote a little bit more?
I love that you found that in a previous interview. Thank you for saying that. It's one of my favorite thoughts. I love it because it does two things at the same time. It matches the mercy and the justice of life. And both of those things work in this environment, in this society. To understand somebody does not mean you agree with them. They're not the same thing. And let's just assume that you are speaking from a side that is beneficial to the more than the few, and that person isn't. If you wanted to convince them of that, you got to understand where they're coming from first. So you can meet them where they are and then turn and walk that road together into the new thing that you'll come out of from behind the curtain with them with. Understanding them is literally just getting the deepest version of them in the palm of your hand, just so you can see it, just so you can recognize that, oh, this person has a whole lived experience of X amount of years that I wasn't here for, that I am not accountable for, that some part they're not accountable for. So how could I turn to this person, or why should I turn to this person and say they don't have it figured out, they're wrong, when I have no clue how they got here? Best thing you can do is ask questions. And to understand that is the way into meeting somebody where they are. You don't have to agree with it. And that mercy and justice thing, those two things matter. Yeah, there's so much. It's somebody steals somebody steals from a grocery store. Okay, they stole. What did they steal? 3 bags of bread. Okay. Were they caught? Yes. Okay, understandable. That they probably need to have some sort of reprimand for that. That's justice, without question. Let's find out that the person is a mother of 4 and just lost her job and their husband has passed away. Now you're gonna add a little mercy as well. Aren't you? Both sides can happen together. That's understanding while still not agreeing.
Again, I absolutely love that quote. And, it's such simple words, but it's very profound to me because I like when people are able to take something that people have a hard time understanding and say it in such a simple way that switches, like a light switch, like turns on or shifts someone's perspective. And I do believe in compassion, but I always struggle with trying to bridge the gap between what you call mercy and justice, right? And when talking about compassion. So when I heard you say that, it clicked so well for me. Like it literally just like I mean, I felt like I entered, I'm being dramatic, but like, again, I felt like my level of understanding was just turned up a notch. So I really wanted to highlight that and have you kind of speak to that for the listeners, because I think it's important to talk about that. Kind of going a step further here, you talk about mindfulness in action. What is that? And why is that important?
You said mindfulness in action, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So mindfulness in action is it's a lot of things. It can be a lot of things depending on the culture. So we're talking about this culture right here, right now, right? So one of the main things I'm thinking about and I'm working on a lot lately is realizing that we live in a very output society. What you're doing has to have an output. You got to show something for it, and in order for you to get something in return. I don't fundamentally agree with that, actually. I don't. But I can't work in a life of what should be. I can only work in a life of what is. Right? So from there, mindfulness in action is the ability to maintain rooting yourself into the ground like a tree, getting the roots, getting stable and knowing who you are, what you have, what you can do, what you have to give, and then finding out how those things are needed in the world. And finding out, and of course, if those mindful parts of who you are, what you do, so on, the you to you things, if they're built in kindness, in compassion, in unity, in calmness and clarity, and trying to make sure that it includes the many rather than the few, then those actions, that mindfulness in action, that second part, is going to blossom way more than if you're looking at it for the sense of self. I can't think of any situation where somebody was completely selfless. I can't think of any situation where somebody who is a kind person is also miserable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the reason I asked about mindfulness right after asking about compassion is because we talked about compassion and how you're holding space for someone where they are. Even though you don't agree with it, you are willing to understand them, which in my mind also kind of releases a level of judgment, right? And then when you add the mindfulness piece, I feel like there's so many different factors to mindfulness, but I think being mindful is also being aware when judgment comes up for others and when
Mm.
we're not being compassionate. And if we add mindfulness and compassion in how we interact with ourselves and others, I think that in and of itself is a very powerful spiritual everyday practice.
Well said. Well said. Absolutely. You you'll find that spike of wanting to judge and wanting to dismiss easily. I still have it. Again, I don't think I won't ever have it. I'm participating in the mystery in this turning cycle over and over again. And I just keep getting a little better. Falling for all eternity, and I'm learning how to do better flips while falling. You know, it's like that. I'm sorry, you're gonna say.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy. Yeah, it's a journey, right? And I think it's good that you mentioned the fact that you just keep getting better and better as time goes on. Because, I can't sit here, I can't speak for you, but I can't sit here and be like, oh, I'm always my most loving self, my most understanding self, and I just forgive all the time. It's, I have different emotions that come up within me and different things that I didn't even realize, mental blocks or preconceptions of people or myself that I didn't even realize I was still holding onto. But every day or every year, I shave off a layer of that. So it's an ongoing thing. Okay, so you say that there's one thing you think every human on this planet needs to hear. What is that thing?
Yeah, depending on it's very interesting. Depending on my mood, you'll get two different answers. They're relatively the same thing. I can walk one to the other, but the main thing is whatever it is you're searching for out in the world. I promise you, I guarantee you, you already have it living within you. The thing you need for the joy, for the bliss, for the rapture, for the enlightenment, and I mean rapture of being taken something. I don't mean like the physical, the biblical rapture version, right? I mean the like I'm taken away by this thing. The thing that activates you, the one thing that you want that wakes you up every day, you already have it. Stop looking around. Check the pockets first. Keys, wallet, phone, bliss. Got it. Okay, cool. It's on you, dog. It's on you. I that once you recognize that, once you at least just say it to yourself at the very least. Frankie Beverly has that line in Running Away. If you get confused, don't go nowhere else. You'll find all that you need right there in yourself. That's Frankie Beverly and Maze. That my mom used to sing that to me most of my life, and she still sings it now. She loves that man, and that line always stuck with me. It's right there where you are. So what you need is that, and how do you do that? How do you find it? You be kind to yourself. Start by being kind first. Don't be hard on yourself. Be kind, and then you'll little by little start to see the better parts floating up to the surface.
Yes. Have you ever read the book The Alchemist?
Oh goodness! This is next in my list. This is
Okay.
next in the list for me. It's
Wow.
here. It's right behind the screen. I took it out of my bookshelf because this was a gift to me, and I was like, I gotta read this thing. 2 days ago, I put it on the table. I was like, this is next on the list. It's right here. Continue,
Okay. As you
please.
were talking, the book just popped into my head. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I picked up the fact that it was, behind your computer. I don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't read it yet,
I have
but
not. Nope.
so just it's some of the themes we've been discussing and kind of what you just talked about. I think that's a theme that's weaved in the book throughout the book. So I'll just leave it there.
Cool.
Um,
Thanks. I
yeah.
love that. That was fantastic.
What are the odds of that? That's so funny. Okay, so I have to ask you one more thing, and I know that we've kind of alluded to it in, different ways throughout the conversation, but I really want to spend time and talk about it. And I know social unification is at the heart of your work. So I really want to talk about why that's important to you and what you believe the greatest barrier right now is to unity in our world and how we could potentially overcome that as a collective.
That's a very grand question. Yeah. There's multiple answers to that, and I'd like them all to be mentioned, but I will just say a few and then dig into one in particular. First thing first, ego. Whoever's listening to this, you got to do whatever you can do to let go of your ego. And I'm doing the same thing every day. In no way am I trying to say, I figured this out. I have no ego. I got ego. Trust me, homie, I got ego. I want every person to realize, though, that the thing, anytime you think to yourself, something over there is bad, scary, wrong, whatever, that's speaking from ego. Ego helps you look left and right so you get hit by a car. It lets you know when you're hungry, lets you know when to be safe. But when it's non-life threatening things, you got to check that ego little by little. Moving on from that part, the division that we live in this life right now of this abundant information society, but we still live in this scarcity mindset because our ancestors were rewarded for living a scarcity mindset, of course, because during that time they had predator and prey chasing them. They were rewarded for that, so that got passed on to every generation. But we don't live in a scarce environment anymore. We live in an abundant environment now. Let us not forget how many available things we have in front of us every single day. You and I in no way could have met 50, 60, 70 years ago, 80 years ago. We couldn't be sitting here 3,000 miles away, and I know what your face looks like. And I know the weather outside in your place. I didn't have to ask anything. I just look and it's there. Let us not forget how abundant that stuff is and how much we can do with it now. And then once we do that and you've let go of some of that ego a little bit, you can learn about the other sides of the way the world works. And then you start to realize that social unification, that blend, that mends all of us, that thread that connects every single one of us.
Well said. Well said. Cesar, this has been such a great conversation. And I say this to all my guests because genuinely, I mean, given the topics that we discuss, we could go down rabbit holes for 10 hours, right?
True.
But this was such a great conversation. And one thing I like to ask all my guests at the end of the show is, have you shifted in anything recently? Have you shifted perspective in anything? And that's because I feel like we're constantly shifting. You know, it could be as lighthearted as you want it to be or as deep as you'd like it to be.
Sure. Yeah. It is the biggest thing for me that has been in my adult life. The shifting of my own, the way I talk to myself. I am just recently learning how to learn. And my whole life I've been learning, but there's been a deep block in me sitting down and learning in a typical societal normal way, taking a class online. That certification I got in mindfulness, I was super proud of because before that, I just found a way to get out of high school. I did all the stuff that was necessary. I paid people to do my work and so on and so forth because I was scared of being wrong. I was scared of looking like an idiot. Lately, it has been the biggest shift for me has been okay, someone's explaining something to me. Don't tune them out. Listen, say it back to them, see what happens. I have trauma from when I was younger from not learning things. So that also comes with it. But what has shifted me for the most was you have the ability to figure these things out. And my partner, for example, she's been so good. She'll explain stuff to me and she can see me getting flooded. I take a deep breath. I go, okay, tell me again. And I get really flustered with stuff. And the biggest shift for me was knowing that that is not me. That's not my narrative. It is a very deeply rooted thing, but I can uproot that. My shift has been I can learn how to learn.
That's amazing. And I think it's timely because I feel like I'm undergoing a similar shift in that
Mm.
regard. So thank you so much for sharing that. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, if they want to listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I would say that the place that you want to find me are two places. My website, CesarCardona.com. CesarCardona. That's D as in David.com. On there, you can see my newsletter. Sign up for my newsletter. I send out 2 to 5 newsletters a month, and it's full of good things, good news happening in the world that affect you as well. Not just, somebody saved a puppy from the tree, which is also great too, but big things that are changing the world that the news is not showing us. Good things, ways that we can connect with each other as well in that newsletter. And also on that website is the podcast, Beauty in the Breaks, stories about resilience during tough times in life. Now, all of that's there on the website.
Beautiful. I'm going to link all of that in the show notes. And kudos to you for spreading the good news that's happening around the world. I always used to say, I wish someone would dedicate a page to just, putting out good news because all we hear is bad news a lot of times. So thank you for that.
You got
C-
it.
Caesar, it
So
was such
much
a,
good things going on in the world. So
yeah,
sorry. It
yeah,
drives me nuts. I'm like, you know how much good things are happening in the world? They're just not talking about. This is what's happening. Please
yeah,
continue.
yeah. They're feeding off our fear. But thank you again for stopping by Shifting Dimensions. It was such a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for having me. You are fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.